"Hire me for a night. I'm starving," the Black Widow pleaded to the weathered rancher, her trembling voice cutting through the Nevada wind as she clutched a tattered shawl against the dying light. The townsfolk whisper she's cursed, 3 men dead after courting her, each meeting mysterious ends. They cross themselves when she passes, certain starvation will claim what bullets and accidents could not. But the gruff cattleman sees something else in her educated speech and desperate eyes. His own ranch papers lie in chaos, foreclosure looming over land that should rightfully be his. What neither knows is that her husband's death and his legal troubles spring from the same poisoned well, a conspiracy that has already killed to stay hidden. One night of desperate alliance could expose the truth, but will they survive long enough to reveal it, or become the next convenient accidents? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The scraps behind Murphy's saloon had already been picked clean by the dogs. Maribel Turner pulled her torn shawl tighter and moved to the next building, her stomach cramped with familiar emptiness. 3 days without proper food. The townspeople of Copper Ridge made sure of that. She approached the general store's back entrance. Mrs. Henderson spotted her through the window and quickly bolted the door. The woman's lips moved in what looked like a prayer, or a curse. Maribel had grown used to both. The front of the store buzzed with afternoon customers. She could hear their voices through the thin walls. Normal people buying normal things. Living normal lives that didn't involve being blamed for 3 men's deaths. A group of children playing in the dust spotted her. The oldest boy, maybe 10 years old, picked up a stone. "Black Widow!" he shouted. The rock hit her shoulder. The other children giggled and scattered. Maribel kept walking. Fighting back only made things worse. She had learned that lesson the hard way. The undertaker's wife crossed the street rather than pass her on the wooden sidewalk. 2 ranch hands outside the barber shop made the sign of the cross. The blacksmith actually spat in her direction. All because Thomas died, then Samuel, then poor young David. All because people needed someone to blame for accidents they couldn't explain. Maribel reached the edge of town where the buildings gave way to scrubland. The sun hung low on the horizon, painting the Nevada mountains purple in the distance. Beautiful country. Deadly country for a woman with no money and no friends. She had been a school teacher once, before Thomas married her and brought her to this godforsaken place. Before the surveying accidents and the whispered accusations and the slow starvation that followed. Now she was just the Black Widow, the woman who brought death to any man foolish enough to care about her. A horse whinnied in distress nearby. Maribel followed the sound to a small ranch house set back from the main road. A man knelt beside a bay mare lying on her side in the dirt. The horse's breathing came in short, painful gasps. The man looked up at her approach, weather-beaten face, gray stubble, eyes that had seen too much. He wore the clothes of someone who worked his own land but struggled to keep it. "She's dying," he said simply. Maribel studied the mare. Swollen belly, rapid heartbeat, classic signs of colic, but not the kind that killed quickly. "Sand colic," she said, "from eating too close to the ground when the grass is sparse." The man's eyebrows raised slightly. "You know horses?" "My late husband was a surveyor. We traveled with pack animals." She knelt beside the mare and placed her hand on the horse's neck. "She needs mineral oil and walking, lots of walking. Don't have mineral oil. Don't have money for the veterinarian either." Maribel looked at the ranch house. Small, but well built. The kind of place a man could make a living if he knew what he was doing. If he could read the legal papers that kept piling up on kitchen tables across the territory. "You're Silas Clayton," she said. "I heard you might lose this place." His jaw tightened. "Heard that from who?" "People talk. Even to widows they're afraid of." Silas studied her face, looking for the evil everyone else claimed to see there. "You're the one they call the Black Widow. I'm the one they blame for things I didn't do." Maribel met his gaze steadily. "Just like you're the one they're cheating out of land you rightfully own." "What do you know about my land?" Everything, she wanted to say. She knew the land office had been making mistakes. on purpose. She knew men like Silas were losing their ranches because they couldn't read the legal language in the foreclosure notices. She knew someone was getting rich buying up seized properties for pennies on the dollar. She knew because Thomas had been investigating the same pattern before he died. "I know you've been paying your taxes and mortgage on time," she said instead. "I know they're claiming you haven't. And I know you can't make sense of the paperwork they keep sending." Silas's silence confirmed her guess. The mare groaned and tried to roll. Bad sign. Without treatment, she would be dead within hours. "I can save your horse," Maribel said, "and I can organize your papers, help you understand what's really happening with your land." In exchange for what? The words stuck in her throat. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. "Hire me for a night. I'm starving." Silas looked at her for a long moment. The dying horse. The woman everyone called cursed. The papers on his kitchen table that might as well have been written in a foreign language. "One night," he said finally. "Then you're on your own." Maribel nodded. One night was more than she had hoped for, more than anyone had offered her in months. It would have to be enough. The mare was back on her feet by midnight. Maribel had mixed cooking oil with water and salt, forcing the mixture down the horse's throat with a funnel. Then came the walking. Hour after hour of slow circles around the ranch yard until the animal's breathing steadied. Silas watched from the porch, silent but attentive. "She'll live," Maribel said, leading the horse back to the small corral. "Keep her on hay and clean water for 3 days. No grazing." "Where'd you learn that?" "My father was a cavalry veterinarian. Before the war." She wiped her hands on a rag. "He taught me animals were often easier to heal than people." Silas gestured toward the house. "Your turn, then. Kitchen tables covered with papers I can't make heads or tails of." The interior was sparse but clean, a bachelor's home with everything in its place, except for the kitchen table, which looked like a tornado had hit it. Legal documents scattered everywhere, some official-looking, others clearly homemade copies. Maribel picked up the first paper. Foreclosure notice dated 2 months ago. She frowned and checked the date again. "When did you last make a payment on this land?" 6 weeks ago. Same as every month for 3 years. She found his payment receipts in the pile, all signed by Deputy Land Commissioner Blackwood, all dated correctly, all showing payments made on time. "According to this foreclosure notice, you haven't paid anything in 6 months. That's impossible." Maribel spread the documents across the table in chronological order. Her mind worked the way it had when she taught mathematics to frontier children. Pattern recognition, logical sequences, finding the mistakes that revealed larger truths. She had learned this skill in a one-room schoolhouse in Kansas. 23 students of different ages and abilities. The only way to manage them was to see the patterns in how they learned. Who struggled with numbers? Who needed extra help with reading? Who was smart enough to help teach the others? Thomas had loved watching her work, the way she could organize chaos into something that made sense. He used to say she had a gift for seeing what others missed. Now that gift might save both their lives. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a series of property transfers. "Morrison's ranch, seized for non-payment 3 months ago. But here's his receipt showing he paid in full." Silas leaned over her shoulder. "Sam Morrison lost his place?" "He never said anything." "Where is he now?" "Gone. Packed up and left town the day after the seizure." Maribel found another file. Jenkins property. Same story. Payment receipts showing money paid. Foreclosure documents claiming default. Property sold to Eastern Investment Company for a fraction of its value. How many ranchers have lost their land in the past year? Silas counted on his fingers. Morrison, Jenkins, the Hartwell brothers, old Pete Sullivan. Maybe 8 or 9 families total. All sold to the same company. She organized the papers into neat stacks. Payment receipts in one pile, foreclosure notices in another, property transfers in a third. The pattern became clear. Someone was taking payment receipts and filing falsified records showing no payments received, then foreclosing on properties that were actually current on their mortgages. then selling those properties to a company that probably didn't exist. "This is systematic fraud," she said. "Can you prove it?" Maribel studied the signatures on the various documents. Deputy Land Commissioner Hugo Blackwood had signed most of the foreclosure notices. But the handwriting looked different on papers from different months, as if multiple people were forging his signature. "Maybe. If we can find the original payment records." "Where would those be?" "The Territorial Land Office. But they're not just going to let us walk in and examine their files." Silas sat down across from her. "So what do we do?" Maribel stared at the neat stacks of papers. Her teacher's mind was already working on the problem. But this wasn't about helping children learn arithmetic. This was about exposing criminals who had already killed to protect their secret. Thomas had stumbled onto something like this. She was sure of it now. He had been surveying land for the territorial government, had access to property records, had probably seen the same discrepancies she was seeing now. Then he died in a surveying accident. Equipment failure, they said. Ropes that snapped at exactly the wrong moment. Samuel Ross had been asking questions about his neighbor's foreclosure. Then his horse threw him on a trail he had ridden safely for 10 years. David Martinez had been helping his father understand a foreclosure notice written in English. Then a rock slide killed him on a path that had been stable for decades. All accidents, all convenient, all targeting men who might have exposed the fraud. "We need to be very careful," she said. "People who ask too many questions about land deals seem to have accidents in this county. You think someone's killing people to cover this up? I think my husband discovered this same fraud before he died." The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of a mantel clock. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the dark desert. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because saying it out loud makes it real." Maribel gathered the papers into a single stack. "And because once we start down this path, there's no going back." Silas reached across the table and touched her hand briefly. "You don't have to do this alone." For the first time in months, Maribel felt something other than despair. Not hope, exactly, but something close to it. "One night," she said quietly. "Maybe a little longer than that." Dawn brought answers Maribel wasn't prepared for. She had spent the night organizing Silas's papers by property, by date, by type of transaction. Her teacher's methods applied to legal documents, everything categorized and cross-referenced until patterns emerged from the chaos. That's when she found Thomas's surveying notebook. It was wedged between two foreclosure notices, almost like someone had hidden it there deliberately. The leather cover bore her late husband's initials. Inside, his careful handwriting documented property boundaries across the county. But the final entries made her hands shake. Thomas had discovered that Eastern Investment Company was purchasing foreclosed properties using falsified surveys. Land boundaries were being redrawn to include water rights and mineral claims that belonged to neighboring ranchers. Properties worth hundreds of dollars were being stolen and resold for thousands. The notebook contained names: Hugo Blackwood at the Land Office, Cornelius Ashford at the Territorial Bank, Deputy Marshal Crenshaw providing enforcement. Even Judge Harrison appeared to be taking payments to rubber stamp the foreclosures. Thomas had documented everything: dates, amounts, meeting locations. The final entry was dated 3 days before his death. "Meeting with Territorial Marshal tomorrow. Have enough evidence to expose the entire conspiracy. We'll send copies to Maribel for safekeeping." But no copies had ever reached her. Silas found her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the notebook. "What is it?" She showed him the pages. His expression grew darker with each revelation. "Thomas knew," she said quietly. "He was going to expose all of them. And they killed him for it. Not just him." Maribel turned to a page near the back of the notebook. Samuel Ross was Thomas's assistant surveyor. David Martinez translated documents for Spanish-speaking property owners. They were all part of the investigation. The pattern was clear now. Thomas had been building a case against the conspiracy. He had recruited help from other men in the community. Men who could read, who understood legal documents, who might testify about what they had witnessed. Then all of them died in convenient accidents. They made me into the Black Widow, Maribel said. People were asking questions about why 3 men died. So they gave the town someone to blame, someone to fear, someone to avoid. Keeps anyone from getting close enough to learn what you might know. Except I didn't know anything, until now. Silas poured coffee from a pot on the stove. His movements were careful, controlled, the way a soldier moved when trying not to think about battle. How many people are we talking about? Maribel counted the names in Thomas's notebook. At least 6 in positions of authority. Probably more we don't know about. And they've already killed 3 men to keep this secret. Which means they won't hesitate to kill 2 more. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating the scattered documents. Evidence of a conspiracy that reached into every level of county government. Proof that would destroy careers and send men to prison, if they could stay alive long enough to present it. A horse approached the house at a steady trot. Silas moved to the window and cursed under his breath. Deputy Marshal Crenshaw. Maribel quickly gathered Thomas's notebook and the most damaging documents. Hide these. Where? Anywhere. Under floorboards. In the barn. It doesn't matter as long as he doesn't find them. Silas stuffed the papers into a flour sack and disappeared through the back door.
Maribel arranged the remaining documents to look like ordinary ranch business. Payment receipts, supply orders, nothing that would interest a law officer. Crenshaw's knock rattled the front door. Silas returned and opened it. The deputy marshal filled the doorframe, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "Morning, Clayton. Heard you had company. News travels fast. Always does when it involves the Black Widow." Crenshaw's gaze found Maribel sitting at the kitchen table. "Ma'am." She nodded, but didn't speak. Better to let him make assumptions about why she was there. "Just wanted to make sure everything was all right," Crenshaw continued. "People in town get nervous when certain folks start spending time together." "We're fine," Silas said. "Course you are. Just doing my job." "Keeping the peace." The deputy's eyes swept the kitchen, noting the papers on the table. "Lot of reading material there. Ranch business." "I'm sure it is." Crenshaw stepped inside without being invited. "Mind if I take a look? Sometimes legal documents can be confusing for folks who aren't used to them." Maribel felt her pulse quicken. The deputy knew exactly what they had been doing. This wasn't a social visit. "Nothing interesting," she said. "Just helping Mr. Clayton organize his files. That's neighborly of you." Crenshaw picked up one of the payment receipts, studied it carefully. "Everything appeared to be in order, as far as I can tell." "Good. Wouldn't want any misunderstandings about property ownership. County takes those matters very seriously." The threat was clear. Stop investigating or face the consequences. Silas moved closer to Maribel, a subtle shift that put him between her and the deputy. "We appreciate you checking on us," he said. "Just doing my job." Crenshaw set down the receipt and headed for the door. "You folks have a pleasant day, and, Mrs. Turner, might want to be careful about the company you keep. Wouldn't want any more accidents." The door closed behind him with a soft click. Maribel and Silas stood in silence until the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance. "He knows," she said. "Question is, how much does he know?" "Enough to threaten us. Not enough to arrest us." Maribel moved to the window and watched the empty road. "Which means we still have time." Time for what? To finish what Thomas started. The plan required Maribel to become someone else entirely. She spent the afternoon transforming her appearance in Silas's bedroom mirror. Her hair, unwashed for weeks, she cleaned and pinned into an elegant bun. The one good dress she owned, saved from her teaching days, still fit despite the weight she had lost. Most importantly, she practiced changing her voice. Less frontier, more finishing school. The accent she had worked so hard to lose when she married Thomas. "I am Mrs. Elizabeth Worthington from Boston," she told her reflection. "I represent a consortium of Eastern investors interested in acquiring ranch properties in Nevada territory." The woman staring back at her looked nothing like the Black Widow who begged for scraps behind saloons. Silas waited in the kitchen when she emerged. His expression shifted from surprise to something approaching admiration. Think it'll work? Hugo Blackwood has never seen me up close. To him, I'm just another superstitious story. She adjusted her skirt. Besides, men like Blackwood expect Eastern investors to be educated women with money. I'm exactly what he wants to see. They rode to town separately. Silas took the main road while Maribel circled around to approach from the east. Anyone watching would see a well-dressed stranger arriving by stagecoach, not the local pariah emerging from a struggling ranch. The Territorial Land Office occupied a 2-story building on Main Street. Impressive by frontier standards, with real glass windows and painted signs, the kind of place that projected authority and permanence. Maribel entered through the front door like she owned the building. Hugo Blackwood looked up from his desk. Mid-40s, soft around the middle, with the kind of mustache men grew to appear more important than they were. His eyes lit up when he saw her expensive dress and confident posture. "Good afternoon. How may I assist you?" "Mr. Blackwood? I am Mrs. Worthington. I believe you received my telegram regarding investment opportunities." Blackwood's confusion lasted only a moment. Then his salesman instincts took over. "Of course. Please have a seat. Can I offer you tea?" "That would be lovely." While Blackwood prepared refreshments, Maribel studied the office. Maps covered one wall, showing property boundaries across the county. A large safe sat in the corner, presumably containing the original documents Thomas had died trying to expose. File cabinets lined another wall. Each drawer was labeled by district and year. Everything she needed was here. "Now then," Blackwood said, returning with a tea service, "what type of properties interest your consortium?" "Cattle ranches, primarily. My associates prefer foreclosed properties, less complicated than negotiating with current owners." Blackwood's smile widened. "You've come to the right place. We have several excellent opportunities available." He pulled out a leather portfolio filled with property listings. Each page showed a different ranch, complete with acreage, water rights, and asking prices. Maribel recognized every property: Morrison's Place, Jenkins' Land, the Hartwell brothers' spread, all stolen through fraudulent foreclosures. "These prices seem remarkably reasonable," she said. "The territory is eager to encourage Eastern investment. We can be quite flexible on terms." "What about legal complications? I assume proper foreclosure procedures were followed." "Absolutely. Every property was seized only after repeated failures to meet payment obligations." Blackwood opened a file cabinet and withdrew several folders. All documentation is in perfect order. He spread foreclosure notices across his desk, the same documents Maribel had studied the night before, but now she was seeing them from the inside of the conspiracy. "May I examine these more closely?" "Of course." Maribel put on reading spectacles and studied each document with exaggerated care. What she was really doing was memorizing names, dates, and signatures, building a mental map of how the fraud operated. The payment records showed no money received from any of the foreclosed ranchers. But she had seen the actual receipts proving payments were made. Someone was maintaining 2 sets of books. "Your filing system is quite impressive," she said. "Organization is essential in territorial administration. I imagine you process dozens of transactions each month." "We do our best to serve the community." Maribel noticed a second desk in the corner of the office. Papers scattered across its surface suggested someone else worked here regularly. "Do you have assistance with all this paperwork?" "My clerk handles routine filings, but I personally oversee all property transfers." A door opened at the back of the office. Cornelius Ashford entered carrying a satchel that clinked with the sound of coins. "Hugo, the Morrison payment." He stopped when he saw Maribel. "I didn't realize you had a client." "Mrs. Worthington, this is Mr. Ashford from the Territorial Bank. Cornelius, Mrs. Worthington represents Eastern investors." Ashford's handshake was damp with nervous sweat. "Pleasure to meet you." "Mr. Ashford handles our financial arrangements," Blackwood explained. "Makes the process much smoother for out-of-territory buyers." Maribel smiled politely while her mind raced.
She was looking at both ends of the conspiracy. Blackwood forged the foreclosure documents. Ashford handled the money laundering. "Perhaps we could discuss financing options," she said. "Certainly. My bank offers very competitive rates for qualified investors." The three of them spent another hour reviewing property options and financing terms. Maribel played her role perfectly. The wealthy Eastern buyer with more money than sense, eager to invest in frontier real estate. By the time she left the land office, she had memorized the locations of key documents, identified the major players, and confirmed the scope of the fraud. She had also made a terrible mistake. As she walked toward her horse, she noticed Deputy Marshal Crenshaw watching from across the street. Their eyes met for a brief moment. His expression shifted from casual interest to sharp suspicion. He had seen the Black Widow enter Hugo Blackwood's office dressed like a wealthy investor. Now he was wondering why the cursed widow needed to meet with the land commissioner. Maribel mounted her horse and rode calmly out of town. But she could feel Crenshaw's eyes following her every step of the way. The investigation had just become much more dangerous. Maribel rode hard back to the ranch, her mind spinning with what she had learned. The conspiracy was bigger than she had imagined, more organized, more dangerous. But she had also discovered something that changed everything. Silas was waiting in the barn when she arrived. His face was grim. "Crenshaw came by 20 minutes after you left town," he said, "asking questions about your sudden interest in fine clothes. He saw me at the land office. Figured as much. What did you learn?" Maribel dismounted and began unsaddling her horse. Her hands shook slightly as she worked the leather straps. "They're stealing everything, not just the ranches, water rights, mineral claims, grazing permits." She pulled the saddle free and set it on a wooden rack. "Blackwood showed me property listings worth tens of thousands of dollars. All foreclosed in the past year. How many people are involved?" "At least a dozen, maybe more." She leaned against the barn wall, suddenly exhausted. "But I found something else, something that changes everything." Silas waited while she gathered her thoughts. There was a map in Blackwood's office, original Spanish land grants from before the territory was established. She met his eyes. "One of those grants covers half the town, including the land office building itself. Who holds the grant? According to the map, it belongs to the Valdez family, but there was a notation in the margin. Property transferred to Thomas Turner, upon marriage to Maria Valdez Turner." The words hung in the air between them. "Your husband owned half the town? My husband married my mother's sister before he married me. Maria Valdez Turner died in childbirth 2 years before I met Thomas." Maribel's voice was barely a whisper. "Which means the land grant transferred to me when Thomas died." Silas stared at her. "You're not just fighting for your life. You're fighting for your inheritance. An inheritance I never knew existed. Thomas never told me about the Spanish grant, never mentioned Maria." She pushed away from the wall and began pacing. "But he must have discovered it during his surveying work, must have realized what it meant. That's why they killed him. Not just because he discovered the fraud, because he owned the land they were stealing." The implications were staggering. If Maribel could prove her legal claim to the Spanish land grant, she would own half of Copper Ridge, including most of the properties that had been fraudulently foreclosed. She would also become the biggest target in the territory. "We need to get that map," Silas said. "It's in Blackwood's office safe, along with all the original documents. Then we break in and take them." Maribel stopped pacing. "No, that makes us criminals. Gives them an excuse to arrest us or worse. So what do you suggest?" She had been thinking about this problem during the ride back from town, approaching it the way she used to approach difficult students. Sometimes direct confrontation made children more stubborn. Sometimes you had to find another way to reach them. We expose them publicly, force them to defend their actions in front of the whole community. How? The Harvest Festival is next week. Everyone in the county will be there, including the territorial judge who's supposed to arrive for the land disputes.
Silas frowned. Judge Harrison is part of the conspiracy. Maybe. But he can't ignore evidence presented in front of 200 witnesses. The plan was risky. It required them to stay hidden until the festival, then present their case in a way that couldn't be dismissed or covered up. It also required them to survive that long. Crenshaw will be looking for you, Silas said. Can't go back to town. And they'll be watching your ranch. They spent the evening making preparations. Silas gathered supplies for a week in the mountains. Maribel copied the most important information from Thomas's notebook onto separate papers. If something happened to the original, the copies might still expose the conspiracy. As darkness fell, they heard riders approaching the house. Silas blew out the oil lamp and moved to the window. 3 men on horseback circled the property. One of them was definitely Crenshaw. "Back door," he whispered. They slipped out of the house and made their way to the barn. The horses were already saddled and ready. Silas had learned military preparedness during his cavalry days. Always have an escape route. The riders dismounted and approached the front door. Heavy knocking echoed across the ranch yard. "Clayton, open up! Official business!" Silas and Maribel led their horses out the back of the barn and into the scrubland beyond. They walked for half a mile before mounting, using the darkness to cover their escape. Behind them, lamplight flickered in the ranch house windows as the men searched for evidence. They rode through the night toward the mountains. By dawn, they had reached an abandoned mining camp Silas knew from his surveying days. Stone buildings that would provide shelter, a spring that would supply water, most importantly, a hiding place where they could plan their next move. As they unsaddled their horses in the pale morning light, Maribel felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Not hope, exactly, but determination. The Black Widow was finished begging for scraps and hiding from accusations. The time had come to reclaim what was rightfully hers, even if it meant facing down the most powerful men in the territory. "1 week," she said, looking back toward Copper Ridge in the distance. 1 week, Silas agreed. The final confrontation was coming. The Harvest Festival drew every soul in the county to Copper Ridge's main street. Families arrived in wagons loaded with vegetables and preserved foods. Children ran between the booths while their parents bartered for winter supplies. The smell of roasted corn and apple cider filled the crisp October air. Maribel watched from the second floor of Murphy's saloon. She had slipped into town before dawn, using back alleys and abandoned buildings to avoid Crenshaw's patrols. Silas positioned himself near the makeshift stage where Judge Harrison would address land disputes. His job was to ensure no one stopped her before she could speak. The crowd gathered as the afternoon sun reached its peak. Nearly 200 people filled the street: ranchers, shopkeepers, miners, and their families. The entire community that had shunned her for months. Judge Harrison took the stage, a small man with wire spectacles and an air of self-importance. Behind him stood Hugo Blackwood, Cornelius Ashford, and Deputy Marshal Crenshaw, the conspiracy's leadership arranged like a tribunal. "Citizens of Copper Ridge," Harrison began, "we gather today to celebrate another prosperous harvest and address matters of territorial law." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. "Several property disputes require resolution. I will hear each case fairly and render judgment according to territorial statute." Maribel gathered her papers and Thomas's notebook. Everything she needed to expose the fraud. Her hands were steady now. The trembling fear of recent weeks had been replaced by cold determination. She made her way downstairs and pushed through the crowd toward the stage. "First case involves the Morrison Ranch foreclosure," Harrison continued. "Records show repeated failure to meet payment obligations." "That's a lie." Every head turned toward Maribel's voice. The crowd parted as she walked forward, creating a clear path to the stage. Gasps and whispers followed her progress. The Black Widow had returned. "Ma'am, this is an official proceeding," Harrison said. "Please step back. I have evidence of systematic fraud in these foreclosures." Maribel climbed the wooden steps to the stage. Evidence that proves Sam Morrison and others were making payments that were deliberately hidden from territorial records. Crenshaw moved toward her, but Silas appeared at the edge of the stage. The deputy stopped.
calculating odds he didn't like. "This woman has no standing in these proceedings," Blackwood protested. "She's not a property owner or legal representative." "Actually, I am." Maribel opened Thomas's notebook to the page containing the Spanish land grant information. "My name is Maribel Valdez Turner. I am the legal heir to the Valdez land grant established in 1821, a grant that encompasses half this town, including most of the properties you've been stealing." The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Harrison pounded his gavel for order. "That's impossible," Ashford sputtered. "The Valdez grant was voided decades ago." "Show me the documentation." Maribel faced the crowd, using her teacher's voice to project over their noise. "I have the original survey maps. I have my marriage certificate proving my legal claim. What I want to know is where my property taxes have been going for the past 3 years." She held up a stack of payment receipts. "Sam Morrison paid his mortgage every month. Here are the receipts signed by Mr. Blackwood himself. Yet somehow those payments never reached territorial records." Harrison tried to regain control. "These are serious accusations requiring proper legal review." "Then let's review them." Maribel spread documents across the judge's table. David Martinez was helping his father understand a foreclosure notice when he died. Here's that notice, claiming 6 months of missed payments. Here are the receipts proving those payments were made on time. She moved to the next set of papers. Samuel Ross questioned his neighbor's foreclosure. 3 days later, he was dead. Here's proof his neighbor had been paying faithfully until the day his land was seized. The crowd pressed closer, straining to see the evidence. Parents lifted children onto their shoulders for better views. "My husband, Thomas Turner, was investigating this fraud when his surveying equipment mysteriously failed." Maribel held up the notebook. "His final entry describes a meeting with territorial authorities, a meeting that never happened because he died the day before." Crenshaw finally pushed through the crowd. "That's enough wild accusations." "Are they wild?" Silas jumped onto the stage carrying a canvas sack. "Because I found these in the deputy's office last night." He dumped the sack's contents onto the judge's table. Dozens of payment receipts scattered across the wood, all signed by Blackwood. All from foreclosed properties. "The real records," Silas announced, "hidden in Crenshaw's desk while fake records were filed with the territory." The crowd's murmur turned ugly. Angry voices demanded explanations. "Furthermore," Maribel continued, "Eastern Investment Company doesn't exist. It's a false name used by this conspiracy to launder stolen properties. Money that should have gone to territorial development has been divided among these men." Harrison stood abruptly. "I'm ending this proceeding." "You can't end the truth." Maribel faced the crowd directly. 3 good men died because they threatened this conspiracy. I was turned into the Black Widow to keep you from asking questions, to keep you afraid of the truth." Mrs. Henderson pushed forward from the crowd, the shopkeeper who had slammed doors in Maribel's face. "Show us the marriage certificate," she demanded. Maribel unfolded the document. Mrs. Henderson examined it carefully, then passed it to other townspeople. "It's real," someone called out. "She owns half the town," another voice added. The crowd turned toward Blackwood, Ashford, and Crenshaw with expressions that made the conspirators step backward. "Citizens," a new voice called from the edge of the crowd. "Stand aside, please." 2 federal marshals pushed through the gathering. Behind them walked a territorial prosecutor carrying official papers. "We've been investigating reports of land fraud in this county," the lead marshal announced. "Based on evidence provided by Mrs. Turner, we have warrants for multiple arrests." The conspiracy crumbled in minutes. Blackwood and Ashford surrendered without resistance. Crenshaw tried to run but didn't make it past the crowd. Judge Harrison found himself facing federal charges for accepting bribes. As the arrested men were led away, the crowd turned back to Maribel, but instead of fear or suspicion, she saw respect in their faces. 6 months later, teacher Maribel operated the largest school in the county. Her Spanish land grant provided steady income that she invested in community improvements. A new library, better roads, fair lending practices at the reorganized territorial bank. Silas had expanded his ranch onto legally purchased land. Their partnership had grown into something deeper, something that promised a future neither had dared imagine.
The Harvest Festival returned with new traditions. Instead of celebrating the powerful, Copper Ridge celebrated truth, justice, and second chances. When new strangers arrived seeking help, Teacher Maribel never hesitated. "Of course," she would say, "we all need help sometimes." The Black Widow had become something far more dangerous to corruption, a woman who refused to stay silent.